We are here today with one of my best friends in the entire world, Maddie Witler. She is here to help me work through what I have deemed the right-hand gauntlet of defeat. So, Maddie, what are we talking about here today? What are we actually doing in order to feel defeated?
This is just a series of right-hand exercises that I worked out a while ago on my journey learning the mandolin. And it's originally a kind of disparate series of kind of 3 different sections of exercises that come from a few different places. But in each of the sections and with the gauntlet of defeat overall, it was kind of an attempt at devising a system, right-hand picking exercises for alternate picking that would run through every possible combination of string changing that you might encounter in playing music. And that's like quite a bit, but it also depends on how you look at it. And so we'll go through the whole thing and I'll try to explain why things are the way they are.
For sure. Well, let's just go ahead and kick this thing off. Round 1 of the gauntlet. Here we go.
So there was a period of time when I used to do this every single day. I would always start by putting the metronome on the tempo that I wanted, playing 8 notes, the same ones I'm going to be playing throughout this entire exercise, and just play 1 string at a time, doing alternate picking, downstrokes and upstrokes, and try to get all of my downstrokes and all of my upstrokes to be exactly even, and try to look away and almost try to fool myself as to which I was doing. And then the next string till it's good. And the next one. Step 2 in the right-hand gauntlet of defeat. I kind of think of it as the 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 section. And this, again, came from playing situations where I found that there was something that was difficult for me. And it was odd meter rhythmic groupings. So especially the 3s, 5s, 7 note groups, and dealing with the changing alternate picking that is involved with that when changing strings. So the very first part of this exercise is to just play each string 8 times, and that's very easy, and the alternate picking is very easy, and every string change is going to be on a downstroke. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I would usually repeat that until I felt the same way as I did about the single strings, that it was loose and that the time was good and that the tone was good and all of that. Then I would move on to 7s. So this is where it starts to get tricky. It's difficult and foreign to feel the grouping of 7 if you're not used to it. And the pick stroke that you change strings on is going to change every time. So the first time it's going to be an upstroke, and the second time it's going to be a downstroke, and then it's going to switch every time. So here's what that looks like. 7. One. And that's phase 2 of the gauntlet.
Phase 2 of the gauntlet. Do you feel defeated yet? Has phase 2 gotten you, right?
It's 2 of 4. So we're halfway.
We're halfway through the gauntlet, yeah.
Is the true meat of the gauntlet.
You mean you're telling me that those 7 string groupings and 5 string groupings wasn't the hardest part?
Right. Although like that's definitely the part that students immediately go like, oh, this is something new, that I see people react to that moment for sure. And that moment was why I developed that section, was because I had trouble with those things. And the first time I thought, can I do 7 groupings in a row like that? I could not. And so I had to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I remember the first time you showed it to me, I was just like, oh, dang. It was like it had never even occurred to me to try and think about it that way. You know, it was all just like play the tune and alternate pick and don't think about it too much, right? You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think that when you're playing a tune naturally, sometimes those odd meter groupings will happen in your picking and you don't notice it. And those still might be the moments that you're struggling with, and you might not notice it until you take away the notes part of it and all the, chaos of playing in a jam or playing live, and can just think about one section at a time. So phase 3 of the Gauntlet of Defeat, the idea is to do every possible combination of cross-picking that we can figure out on 2 strings, 3 strings, and then 4 strings. And then beyond, perhaps, for chance.
Say you have more than 4 options for strings, right?
They play the Chapman stick.
Yes. That's the companion video to this one.
Okay, moving on. This is going to be every combination I could think of that was notably different and useful of cross-picking on 2 strings. Cross-pick exercises, 2-note combinations. And then do that on every string. The outside pair. Pair. Every combination of strings. Two and one, so every combination of strings. The opposite of that. Every combination of strings. That's 2-note combinations. I think about this like primary numbers. These are like the primary numbers of the right hand. And when you get down to it, it's combinations of 2s and 3s that we're making up everything with. As we get into 3-note patterns and 4-note patterns here, really the bass motion that you're doing is a combination of what we just did on the 2 strings, just constantly moving around between which strings you're doing. So here's 3-note patterns. Forward roll. And then the other combination of strings. Backward roll. Other combination. Forward, backward. The opposite of that, which is starting in the middle. And then 4-note combinations. Forward roll. Backward roll. Backwards and forwards. Forward and backwards. Groups of 3 forward roll. Groups of 3 backward roll.
Phase 3 complete. And if you're not defeated yet, then we've got a whole other phase ready for you after this one, right?
Phase 4 coming at you. So phase 4 of the right hand gauntlet of defeat is derived from one of the exercises that Chris Thiele teaches in his classic homespun DVD.
Go buy homespun tapes. That's how we learned.
Honestly, it's absolutely true. Those lessons are great things. And so Chris Thiele gives this exercise in his lesson, and I saw it and learned it and thought, well, that's cool, but doesn't cover every base. And so I've extrapolated on it, and that's phase 4. Starting on the next string. Thus concludes the Maddie Witler right hand gauntlet of defeat.
I can just tell right now that there are like 500 people watching this video that are like hurling into their trash cans off to the side or something like that. Like you lost me at like phase 1.2, Maddie.
It's interesting. Let's talk about how useful this is. So I was crazy in high school and used to practice like this and used to do this every day. And I don't know if that was necessary. You know, it was kind of a ritual. It was a way to spend my time and a thing to do and throw myself into. I think with any technical exercise, whether it's a scale, whether it's a right hand exercise like these, it's really important to keep at the forefront of your mind why you're doing the exercise. Like, what is it that you're actually trying to practice? Because the end product shouldn't be that you're good at the exercise. Like this, no one is going to be impressed that you can play the Maddie Witler right hand gauntlet of defeat at the next Thanksgiving family gathering. So it's important to see this as a tool and as a resource and as a useful sandbox, a sandbox to try out ideas, to practice tone, timing, staying loose, staying relaxed.
Yeah. And as far as like the tone, timing, staying loose, staying relaxed, this is something that kind of eluded me forever. And it took doing some version of this exercise to realize that it's almost just kind of like a mindfulness exercise, this thing in a way, right? Because you have to keep your focus locked into these very specific patterns and the feeling of your pick interacting with the string and the feeling of the right hand maintaining its, looseness and stuff like that. So it's almost like a really hard meditation or something like that, right?
It definitely is a meditation. I think so much of music is like that, and it's about finding ways to get your mind to a calm, maybe even slightly dispassionate perspective from which to control the music that you're presenting to your audience or to the world.
That's beautiful. One question that kind of presents in my mind, because I know that right now you can kind of slay this workout and you're obviously an amazing technically accomplished player, but when you were coming into some of the problems, you said that a lot of these exercises were developed as like self-prescribed kind of things, like I noticed something in my playing that I can't do. What is maybe some of your process for mentally and physically overcoming those things? Because for me, the 2-string groupings inside the strings, starting high and then upstring. We talked about this for years. We've talked about this, I feel like. So maybe could you provide some insight? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that specific one is the one I was going to mention when you started your question, because it's the thing within like the 3-note groupings. When I see folks having trouble, the moment within the 3-note grouping that is giving them trouble is the inside pair. So we talk about the inside pair a lot, which is the move of going up on the lower and down on the higher and staying there. And how that's one of the most difficult things, because you're going through a string and then you have to like figure 8 over it and go back up to the next string and then figure 8 over it, as opposed to this really nice kind of rounded motion that you can do if you're just on the outside. And I think it's one of the reasons that a lot of people deviate from their alternate picking, is to make that moment easier a lot of the time. So certainly having a vehicle to hone in on that moment really specifically and work on it is a good, useful thing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then other than that, I find it useful as like a reference. I think later on when I was still like practicing really regularly and had a routine, the way it got incorporated was that I would start warming up and start practicing and playing, and then would notice what I was having difficulty with. So if I was having difficulty with kind of back and forth cross-picking kind of stuff, then I would do that portion of the gauntlet. And if I was having difficulty with timing stuff or staying loose across weird stuff, then I would do the second portion.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of like modular then. You don't necessarily need to maybe start at one spot and end at another. You can just kind of hone in on the area that is best for you.
It's totally modular. It's totally a reference. It's obviously a lot of information at once and might not be useful to everyone at once. So you can take what you need from it. But also, like we were saying at the beginning, I think the lesson, one of the big lessons is the value in working out something like this for yourself, that you can evaluate your own playing, look at the thing that is causing you difficulties in technique, and make up an exercise for it. And you don't necessarily need to go out and search the internet for an exercise. Like, those are good, but you'll probably get more of a benefit if you interrogate your own playing and say, like, what is the moment that's causing me difficulty, and how do I make up a thing that just makes me do that moment over and over and over?
Yeah, I love that. And I almost feel like, too, the workout that you've given us here, because I'm sure a lot of people watching this or listening to this are like, man, that seems so daunting to me to be able to like develop my own exercise. But this workout, I find it to be awesome because it shows you all of the different kinds of right hand motion. So now you have that frame of reference for later, right? It's like, oh, I'm noticing this section of a piece is crazy. And if you really hone in on it, then you're going to be like, oh, shit, it's that inside the strings thing that Maddie was talking about. So maybe I just need to like hone in on that, right?
And when I say developing my own exercise, it's really parts of this. Like, nothing we can teach is like fully, truly original. Like, we've all learned from some incredible people that have come before us. And like, full credit, like the last section is based on a Chris Thiele thing. The middle section with all the cross picking is based on a series of exercises that John Moore would give out. John Moore, incredible guitar and mandolin player, and was Chris Thiele's teacher when he was a child. And so John Moore gave out a lot of those exercises at a workshop. Then again, I looked at them and was like, oh, these groupings, there's actually ones that are missing that don't quite cover every possible string crossing. So what this version is extrapolated upon version of that. And so if you look at this maybe and you're like, oh, Maddie's missing this one very obvious thing, then great. Like, that's the thing for you to add to it. If you have more strings than the mandolin, that's worth practicing. So
yeah, in phase 3 and 4, I was just watching you go, and I'm like, oh god, this is gonna take like 3 times longer for the guitar. Just moving those. Yeah.
Well, and I start to wonder how useful it becomes across 6 strings, because, like we were talking about, it's if you really get to the prime numbers of it, it's doing the same little 2 and 3 string group motions over and over. And like I mentioned, like, I have come to practicing guitar and kind of taking it seriously, and being a little known as a guitar player much later. And I haven't done all of this on guitar. That's why I wanted to teach it today on the mandolin. Even though I do teach both guitar and mandolin, but for this specific exercise, it was developed on the mandolin, and it comes in handy. Like, it comes out in my playing on the guitar. Of course, it's completely incorporated into everything I do, but I haven't specifically worked this out on the guitar.
Yeah. I'll say I like the fact that you brought up how useful are some of these things across 6 strings, because I remember practicing some of those like string jumps, like going across all 6. And I mean, like, that's cool to technically be able to do that, and like develop it loose and all that kind of stuff. But like, when are you ever doing that? You know what I mean? On the guitar, it could be a fun effect every now and again. I've maybe seen David Greer do some stuff like that, but you'll probably get more out of focusing on those 3 and 4 string groups anyways, which is kind of what I think you were getting at, right?
For sure. Well, and I think for me, like, where that might come out on the guitar is like, sometimes I'll do imitation finger picking with a flat pick kind of deal, you know? And so like, it's not necessarily all about figuring out what to do at 170. Like, you know, like, of course you're not going to do those big jumps at a bigger tempo, but there's a lot of slower tempos. There's a lot of textural moments and things that those become useful with. And if they're in your playing as something that you can easily access, then they'll come out and they'll be that cool thing. So, but I would agree that the straight across up and down 6 strings, I mean, I think someone should do it. Someone watching this, if you want to do that, you should do that. I think you could get a lot of benefit from it. But, you know, if you're focusing on all the right things and doing the right stuff. But again, I also think that the more you learn about this and the deeper you get into it, the more you realize that what's important are those 2 and 3 note groupings and the odd meter thing at the beginning and the section at the beginning of just honing in on getting even downstrokes and upstrokes. Like the further I get in my musical journey, the more that those are the things that I go back to practice, and I don't worry about or think about practicing all that other stuff, because I know that the thing that I'm practicing, that bass thing that I'm practicing, is the important thing that will allow all that other stuff to happen.
I love that. There was one question that my mind jumped to a second ago, and now it's gone. Oh, you mentioned the odd groupings. You know, that was one thing I actually wanted to circle back on after you did the workout. When you're going through that like 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 kind of thing. So for the inside the strings, like string crossings, but rapidly between 2 strings back and forth, you were talking about this like figure 8 motion and this arc motion, depending on whether you're inside or outside the strings. But for some of those, like the 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing where you're doing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, are you thinking about what some people call like pick slanting and like doing direct angles across the strings on that? Or is that still more of like an arc type motion in your right hand?
I'm not really thinking about the angle. And I'll say also that I think that this is kind of a different thing on mandolin and guitar.
Yeah.
Because the mandolin has the pairs of strings, it requires your technique to be a lot more flat, honestly. So it requires you to get an even sound going in both directions. Your pick needs to hit the strings this way, the same way it hits going this way. And if it's at an angle like this, it's gonna be uneven. So it might happen, it does happen that my hand is angled, but certainly I'm kind of going for as flat a plane that I'm picking across as possible,
Yeah.
a flat plane, as opposed to any swinging or like arcing. And with guitar, you know, I've been practicing a lot more guitar and working on it lately. And I do find that you can use that. You can use those angles to kind of actually make it a little easier on yourself, because it's one string, and no matter which way you pick it, it's, as long as you're not like slapping it against the fretboard or something, like you're going to get a similar sound. And it's not the same. So I think it's still worth pursuing that kind of flatter plane. But yeah, there is certainly a motion that happens to get your pick out of the way of the other strings. And you certainly have to be able to like take a big swing. Like I'm taking a big swing at the mandolin and still able to just hit one note. So there's like a dip in thing that's happening. And yeah, I don't really know. I haven't thought too much about that dip in thing, because I think if I think too much more about it, other than associating it with time, then it falls apart. Like if I think about the motion of dipping in, then it falls apart. If I think about producing a clear note and having it be consistent and even and good time, then it can happen.
Yeah, and relaxed, right? Like part of maybe what's guiding your motion is actually just the physical, right? Like am I relaxed? Yeah. Is the tone clean? That's like the only 2 requirements you have, right?
Yes. Am I relaxed is like asking all of those things. Basically, like, is the sound good and are you comfortable? Are
Mhm.
the like very basic things. And one thing I was noticing with that also is that I use the amount of space I take up as a means of adjusting to time. So when I'm playing slower, I find it less helpful to keep things small, even if I can play it. Because then I have to stop, like this is the motion. So it's much nicer for me if the motion I'm taking, if the motion I'm making takes up the time that I'm doing, it helps things even out a whole lot. But to do that, I have to be relaxed enough and confident enough in my accuracy that I can do that bigger motion and not.
Yeah. When I saw you doing that and explaining it, it almost reminded me of the arm of a mechanical metronome, like one of those Whitners. When you're when you're at like a slow tempo, that thing's like choom, 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 right? Like it's going way back and forth, but fast it's just right.
Yes,
So
I like
to me, that
that.
I feel like that's a good analogy or something, you know?
I think that is a fantastic analogy. Good job, Hayes.
Yeah, I can interpret what smart, great musicians say and do. Now I just need to be able to do it.
Yeah, because you are a smart, great musician. I think that we've kind of covered the limits of it short of getting into the mechanics of technique, which I'm like kind of specifically avoiding. Like we've
Yeah.
a little bit of it, but that's just a whole different thing. Yeah,
Well, and if anyone watching this video is interested in that whole different thing, I think there's a place that they could probably go find that whole different thing sometimes, and that would probably be
my Patreon. Yeah, I do have a basics of right hand technique for guitar lesson and the same lesson for mandolin, and some thoughts on how to feel time. And I'm just making more lesson videos, and there's a great community of folks growing over there. So yeah, come check it out. Thanks so much for having me, Hayes. It's been a real pleasure and a really enjoyable way for me to present this topic. So
I have taken so much inspiration from you over the last 15 years of my life, and this workout and the kind of insights that you provided me have absolutely 100% leveled up my playing. So anyone out there listening, take this stuff seriously. Do what Maddie says. She's awesome. We love her. Great having you, Maddie.
yeah, bye.